The audience is a poem that was inspired by something that a friend said to me quite a long time ago when we were much younger, and she was quite depressed. And she had this idea that she would like to just live inside a cinema, um, a, a way of staying away from reality or protecting herself from reality, which I think we all find lots of different ways to do. Um, I think there is an affinity between poetry and film, um, or at least the kind of films that I like the most, which is that they're both about subtext. They're both about what's happening under the surface, what it means, maybe what's unsaid, um, or or what's the next layer down. Um, I'm not sure about them being ways to edit a life for me, but maybe they're both ways of understanding and exploring life more. Um, and I guess also connecting with other people's lives. As much as I love poetry, there have been times when writing poetry, I've felt kind of restricted by it, that what I can say or how I can say it has felt a bit restricted. And I think that's why well, it's definitely why I've moved more towards writing prose poetry in recent years. There's something about the line break that started making me feel a little choked, although line breaks can be wonderful, but they just weren't where I was going anymore. And I don't really write essays. I sort of have done, but every time I try to write pretty much everything creative that I write sort of as a poem, even if it is basically prose. But what I'm really interested in, both as a writer and a reader, is the place where poetry meets something else, and what they bring to each other. I've been particularly interested in where poetry meets the essay. They're both forms that I think are trying to ask questions and explore things. And um, what poetry can bring, I think, is um, that sense of looking for deeper meaning, of having more intense language, of being able to kind of have more gaps, more fragments, but be able to leap over them, or the reader can leap over them, and make meaning out of the different bits. Um, yeah, I mean, I think if you stretch things far enough, you can do pretty much anything in a poem and pretty much anything in an essay, and maybe memoir as well. But what I like best is when they all kind of come together. And about 8 years ago, with some friends, I ran a conference about poetry and the essay, and what happens when they meet. And just next week, I'm running another conference with the same friends up at Victoria University of Wellington, um, about this form called the lyric diary, or genre that is maybe called a lyric diary. That's a possible title for it, but it's these hybrid works. Some of the works um, are novels, and some of them are poetry, and some are essay. Some of the things we're going to be talking about is like The Crying Book by Heather Crystal, or Bluets by Maggie Nelson, or Weather by Jenny Offals, some examples. Also Claudia Rankine's American Lyrics. And they're all um, works that take things from different genres and bring them together into this really interesting space. Um, and that's what I'm excited about at the moment. in my reading and in my writing. Both of my poems, How to Die and How to Live Through This, are from my last book, How to Live, which doesn't actually give you a lot of useful information about how to live or useful advice. But I do think How to Live Through This is maybe the one poem that does. It came out of an experience that I had that was very hard, and one of those ones where I had to just focus on what to do next on without freaking out, just to focus on practical things. And it's sort of full of the kind of advice that I give my friends and they give me, um, of how to get through hard things. And I, as well as my own experience, I pulled in kind of other people's experiences as well. And it was a poem that went around a little bit when we went into lockdown here, with the COVID-19 pandemic. And sort of, yeah, one of those things about focusing on the the nice things in your life, or the things in your life that um that can make it manageable, like remembering to go for walks, remembering to breathe, remembering to drink enough water, airing your bedroom. Um, yeah, they're not solving the big problems. They're helping you just get through the problems. Um, yeah. I'm not normally an instructional kind of person. Or maybe I am. Maybe I'm someone who does like to give advice, but I'm not someone who thinks that I'm always right. And so, um, yeah. But sometimes you do need to be guided. Um, and sometimes you need to guide yourself. I discovered the oblique strategies cards that were created by Brian Eno and Peter Schmidt, after watching a documentary about Brian Eno last year, which was really fantastic. Um, and it connected with some stuff that I had been thinking about randomness and chance and the creative opportunities in there. I had been doing um, an exercise around. I had a bit of time off work. I was doing some writing exercises. I wanted to surprise myself. I'm easily distracted, so I was timing myself for 5 minutes, and I would to get a I would open the book that I was reading at the time or my own journals, and I would um like at random pick um a word or a phrase, and I would write about it for 5 minutes. And what I enjoyed about that was I wasn't doing it for any particular purpose, but it was surprising where I went. And then when I saw the Brian Eno documentary, I felt an affinity with the way he creates art. I Back to the question. I mean, I my poems do feel written rather than discovered, and that I do put in effort and thought and critical thinking as well as creativity. But sometimes you do feel a little bit like it's come more easily, and like your subconscious has written it for you already. And that can feel quite magical. The poems in My Bourgeois Apocalypse were written in quite an unusual way. I wrote all the sentences, but I didn't write them as part of these poems. They were sort of randomly selected. Well, I randomly selected them, and and then I arranged them, um, and cut them out, and I did yeah, did some crafting with them without generally changing anything about the sentences. And so mm, that was they were kind of um yeah, it was sort of a putting the pieces together to see what new meaning it could make and seeing the new connections between them. Um, and that continues that possibilities of randomness and making meaning from it, which I think our brains do. Our human brains like to take one thing and another thing and find the connection between them, find some meaning in them. And I'm really fascinated with that. Um, and I think that yeah, that I do talk about the impossible. Yeah, that poems aren't puzzles to be solved. Um, I do enjoy um interpreting a poem and understanding what I think the author means by it, but it's also about what I mean by it. And I think if we try to lock down just one meaning, it flattens a poem. I enjoy infinite possibilities of poetry. I definitely don't see confessional as a bad thing. While I mean, I myself have tended to write a lot of poetry that isn't directly about me. Um, I've written a lot of biographical poetry, so about other people's lives, and then I've written quite a lot about sort of well, poems inspired by film. Um, but I do sometimes, yeah, want to write about myself, and I enjoy reading poetry that people have written about themselves, or reading all sorts of forms, um, where people are writing their truth and their experiences. And yeah, I do see the personal as political. That's quite a you know a feminist mantra, and I think it's true. I think where we stand is political. The facts of our lives is often very political. And yeah, and so um talking about the things of your own life um can be really powerful. I had a I had lunch with a good friend of mine yesterday who is also a poet, but she's writing a memoir at the moment, which is about her own life and also about some of her family history, and particularly some um, female ancestors of hers. And she said to me that she wanted to write it as memoir rather than as poetry because she wanted it to be clearly true. Um, she wanted to talk about those sorts of things um, in a direct sort of way. And I there's a lot of power in talking about things. I am a middle-aged woman now, and it feels like it's really only recently that people have been talking about menopause in a public sort of way. And so you've got that talking about these kinds of experiences, um, making them visible. Not that poetry makes everything very visible, but yeah, it's a very powerful thing. And in terms of about this, the specificity of my own life, I I guess what I wanted to say is that I really love how when you put something in a poem, it becomes more than just like a straightforward fact. It it becomes metaphorical and it becomes a place of meaning and maybe even more than the fact. And in poetry, sort of this lovely liminal space, I think, where everything is kind of assumed to be true, but not required to be factual exactly. Um, yeah, I think that's really what I have to say about that.